Canada and the United States actually give more vaccines to our children than any other developed nation in the world. And in some cases, they give twice as many vaccines.
When you look at a collection of bills that they've been putting forward, I mean, this is the sort of stuff that the Soviet Union was built on, only in a technocracy where it's much more intense.
We're turning around a big ship here, Mark, and at least this is turning in the right direction.
The backlash to that lie was churches were burned to the ground as Christians were scapegoated for this thing.
There's no scientific evidence to support their claims. This is fraudulent from my perspective.
Suddenly, the organizations that are supposed to make sure those oaths are maintained are saying the inverse of that. You will not follow those oaths anymore.
If this decision against Detective Helen Grews is allowed to stand, it means that we don't have a rule of law in Canada. We don't have independent policing. We have two levels. We have one for the political class and one for the rest of us. Well, welcome, friends. Nice to have you back. We're landed back where we started after a great weekend last weekend in Rhode Island. Mark, it was a pleasure to spend so much time with you and have some pretty wonderful conversations.
Well, with you too, and it was interesting because one moment I remember, and folks, we're so proud of Ted as Canadians or whatever we are north of the 49th, because I believe it was Mary Holland was on stage and she was talking. She goes, some of us who have been dealing with these issues and violations of kids, et cetera, have been in here a long time. And you've got a theater full of 400 or 500 people. You've got 40 experts from around the world. And she says, like Ted Kuntz, right off the stage, Mary Holland points, like Ted Kuntz, there's somebody who's been in this fight a long time and was here before it was popular, before it got a little easier. It's hard to believe, Ted. It was harder before I showed up, eh?
That was pretty pleasant to hear that acknowledgement from Mary. I felt quite moved by that.
Well, I can tell you a lot of people were happy that you're there and so grateful that Colin Carey made the trip down and Liam, young Dr. Liam Carey was there with us. And I met some beautiful Canadians. I think Mary was there. Oh, there was a woman, everyone was talking about, a beautiful woman in her 80s who traveled. I think she drove all the way there. Dr. Heather Elliott was there. We have a comment from here today. So thanks to everybody that made it. And, we had a full house pretty much. It was a big auditorium. I don't know how many people it held, 500 or something like that. There was more than 1,000 people live streaming, which means more because people team up. But we've created an amazing library and we're working hard in the background. Over the next week or so, we plan to organize all of that material and then we'll remind you folks, you can still watch the whole conference. And I'm going to get a $30 less my $3 Trozy 10 or WCH Canada 10 discount and have access to the whole library because it was a lot of learning and it certainly wasn't rose-colored glasses by any means, but it was looking towards solutions. I think a lot of us came home a little bit inspired.
Yeah, and I want to say, Mark, one of my highlights was watching you present. And what I shared with others is that you and I have spent a lot of time together over the last 5 years, but I've only seen you in warrior mode. And I got to see you in Dr. Mark Trozy mode, where you were sharing your craft, you were teaching the audience about emergency first aid, and you were so passionate and you were electric. It was fun to watch you. So, and the comment I made is, boy, I really got an even deeper appreciation of what Canada lost out on when they took away your license, Mark.
Yeah, well, given the cards the way they are, and thanks so much for that, given the way the cards are on the table, if I was chained to them by one of these provincial medical license things, I would have tape on my mouth. I would be a slave. I wouldn't be able to save nearly as many lives or help many people because either I could be in a clinical setting as a slave, not able to tell the truth, or for now, we're out here giving people the answers, discovering the solutions, doing the research. And yeah, but it was fun. And I have to admit, I hope that someday this all settles down till the ground under our feet is stable enough that I can say, oh, okay, that issue solved. hey, let's line up some sick people and help them out. I'd love to do that. And I'm sure we will be doing that somewhere before too long.
But you're right. I think the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario actually give you your freedom so that you could speak the truth because your colleagues who are still under their control don't get to tell the truth. They have to follow orders. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I think that must be a very difficult place to be for an ethical doctor to be under those circumstances.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's not possible to remain an ethical doctor under those circumstances,
Yeah.
especially the front line. I could see a lot of surgeons, they just don't want to get involved. So they just wait to once it's time to start their surgery, they do a good job. But everybody at the front line that's got to deal with patients in terms of diagnosis and that whole thing has been compromised. It's very sad. But that's why we had a conference called Building a Better Way USA and the World. And we are creating new answers. And you're going to see more news. I haven't left all those great Canada's best doctors behind. Believe me, Francis Christian, Roshane Killian, etc., Dr. Hodkinson, etc. There,
Yeah.
we still have some great doctors. We're just going to reorganize things, unless by some magic thing we actually get a functional old world government and they clean this mess up and lock up the people that should be. But either way, we're going to persevere, folks. We're going to keep giving you solutions. Keep taking care of your own health and be very careful when juggling chainsaws because it's a bit dangerous out there. Especially as we learned about, we had presentation from the teams who are working on creating the possibility for people to get a blood transfusion when they
Right.
need one, but having the freedom to choose the history of what sort of genetic modifications were made to that blood before they got it. So, Ted, I got one other thing I want to just briefly mention that I'm very happy about this week, a major win. And I want to thank a lot of you folks have encouraged and supported myself and other doctors and scientists working together because though we've learned a lot, I mean, I've made it one of my main missions to understand the mechanisms of how the COVID-19 mRNA bioweapon affects the body. And through that, we've made a lot of breakthroughs in terms of what can we do. Where you get into nattokinase, ivermectin, and the long list of things we've been sharing. But the research project with Dr. Villa that a lot of you have supported, and I want to thank you and encourage you to continue to support if you can. We've brought in an amazing immunologist. A lot of folks may know the great Dr. Byron Bridle has got a lot on his plate right now. And so we're very grateful that through connections in, believe it or not, New Zealand, scientists there, Dr. Bruce Rapley, that did all the calamari analysis, introduced me to an amazing immunologist in Canada, and she has joined our group. And I'll tell you, all of us are on a learning curve, and we're starting to see hypotheses and data sets start to make sense. So, folks, I think you can expect some very profound insights on the situation for the injection victims and for those of us affected in other ways from the COVID operation over the months ahead. And so I'm very happy about that. But I'll tell you, I feel like I'm back in med school or an amazing medical school with the level of knowledge we're learning about the immune
Wow.
system. So fascinating stuff. Big
That's
shouts to Dr. Bruce Rapley, who helped set that up, and Dr. Latterroot, who's joined the group. And very shortly, I'm going to be publishing an interview with Dr. Rapley, who is just a brilliant scientist and a really fun, enlightened guy. So that's going to be fun coming up soon.
very exciting.
Well, maybe before we jump into this week's wins, I'd like to just jump briefly into the comments. Forgive me, folks, been quite busy, and so we're going to be a little bit brief with the comments because I've got kind of 2 weeks of comments to dabble in. So there's lots of great comments. Thanks for everybody. I'm enjoying reading and our conversations. But from a couple of weeks ago, Terry McDonald, we were promoting the Alliston showing of the shot, Sean Hartman's story in Alliston, Ontario. Terry McDonald thanked us for helping to promote it and said it was a huge success, big turnout. John Alton was sharing something you've shared before, Ted, was just being dismayed that not one federal MP seems to be
Yeah.
interested in anything that the National Citizen Inquiry found or anything that you and Ted uncovered, which I too am dismayed. But Wayne Llewellyn, who we know is very meticulous in detail, he actually reported making some progress as an NCI ambassador and that he has positive communication with the chair of Canada's Standing Committee on Agriculture and a few others. So We may see some of these old illegitimate government structures getting involved in some of the new legitimate structures like the NCI. And also, there's a great conversation that carried on there between John Elton, Wayne Luen, and I regarding the NCI and lack of attention and the kind of subtle conversation about why that is. I got a comment here. I hope you don't mind I read one in complete. This is from Lisa Erickson, and she supports your assertion, Ted, that we are in a abusive relation with the so-called government or governments. And she broke it down in detail. And so I just want to read this. Ted, you're absolutely right. I've been saying the same thing for the last 6 years. We are in an abusive relationship with our government. Here are some of the characteristics of an abusive relationship. Verbal abuse. Think what Trudeau called the unvaccinated. Gaslighting. Masks work. Blaming the victim. Pandemic of the unvaccinated. Accusing the victim of perceived slights. The COVID hoax. Controlling behavior, lockdowns, public shaming, calling out the unvaccinated, unpredictable, volatile behavior, implementing the War Measures Act, financial control, freezing bank accounts, preventing the victim from seeing family and friends, lockdowns and institutions. And it just goes on. And she goes through a long list, and you're like, wow, Ted, you weren't joking. I guess well, Ted, you're a psychotherapist, so I guess that makes sense that you would see that parallel. Lisa Erickson agrees with you. A couple more. Karen A. stated this: I no longer trust any institution, especially Death Canada, formerly known as Health Canada, and thanked us for another great wins of the week. And Kathleen Strachan, I think she must have been talking about you, Ted. She said, looking good, sounding articulate, informed, and compassionate as always. Thank you for helping to educate so many. Cheers to the true heroes, and cheers to you, Kathleen, and all the heroes in the chats. Lastly, John Alton and others were happy to see Dr. Colin Carey and Dr. Villa join us last week. Folks, if any of you haven't seen last week's Wins of the Week, it was a bit unusual because Ted and I basically captured Dr. Colin Carey, captured Dr. Maravik Villa, and said, join us. And we basically set up a very improvised situation in a back room, backstage at the conference. It did Wins of the Week as a group. So that was a lot of fun. And lastly, Dr. Heather Elliott attended the conference and shared her positive report. And there was an interesting discussion with John Alton, Ohm, and myself about Pierre Poilievre and his comments against medical gender modification in children. And I thought that was an interesting conversation because, you know, where we live, you hear different opinions and you're listening to each other's opinions. And there's some very different ways of looking at that. So thanks, John and Ohm, and thanks for everybody for sending in your comments.
Yeah.
Well, we got a big list, eh?
We do. Yeah, it's amazing what piles up in a week, Mark. So lots of things to celebrate here.
Excellent. Oh, by the way, Ted, I was happy that nobody sent me any mean comments about the kind of crazy rock and roll song we chose last week. But I just thought we're not going to take it. It was a pretty good motto.
It's a pretty good refrain. Yeah.
Yeah. Friends, if you're thinking of it, please click that like button. Or if at some point you realize we're doing a good job, or at least Ted's doing a good job, please click the like button, share the Wins of the Week with somebody else who could use cheering up, and subscribe. So, Ted, where are we going to get started? Start in the political department?
Yeah. So this first one actually is a message that was delivered from Action for Canada, Tanya Gau's group. And this is what she wrote. She said, after years of hard work, strong advocacy, and standing up for Alberta families, Bill 25 has officially passed third reading and received royal assent. And so, for those that aren't familiar, Bill 25 took a bold stand to protect our children and youth from political and ideological indoctrination in schools. So, coming this September, politics and ideology will be officially removed from Alberta classrooms, and parental rights are strengthened. Neutrality and education, not indoctrination, will once again be the focus in Alberta schools. And so this is a major victory for parents, students, and they say common sense. And hopefully it'll set a precedent for other provinces as well. So what Bill 25 did is it removed ideological and political agendas such as SOGI 123, the PRISM Toolkit, critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and land acknowledgements from Alberta classrooms. And she concludes and says we must remain vigilant and actively involved to ensure full compliance. But that's a pretty good move. Happy to see that.
Well, that's a fabulous new movement. And, when you say received royal assent, that means Bill 25 this is now law.
Right.
So this is the new reality in Alberta. And, we got to really raise a hat to Alberta on this one, Ted, because forgive me, I don't have the name off the top of my head. Maybe we'll pull up her picture or put something in the related links. But the new, I believe, president of the Canadian Association of Pediatricians is a doctor of sorts, I guess, who runs a gender medical abuse clinic, in my opinion, in Hamilton. And, she's an advocate for 13-year-olds making these kind of decisions and that parents shouldn't get in the way. She's an advocate
Wow.
for, recognizing, gender identity issues in 2 to 3-year-olds. So boy, on this week, is Alberta distinguishing itself from the rest of the slave colony? That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well done, Alberta.
Yeah.
Well, Alberta's got another one here, Ted. Alberta's Future Inside Confederation was up for debate last week, and the Aristotle Foundation hosted a sold-out event where prominent lawyer and Alberta independent advocate Keith Wilson squared off against former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. And Kenney has reemerged on the political scene in recent weeks, touting this quote, lead, not leave message, and offering yet another pitch for patience with Ottawa. And the venue was packed with Albertans eager to hear both sides of one of the most compelling political questions facing the province. And so if you're wondering who won the debate, well, you can watch the highlights and decide for yourself. Ted, I thought Jason Kenney swabbed himself and went into hiding with Trudeau or something, but I was surprised to see him crawl out into public again. What are your thoughts on this? Maybe something a little less biased than I just had to say.
Well, I'm not a fan of Jason Kenney. He was one of the more egregious premiers across the province during COVID, pushing the jab and shaming people. For him to be, pitching patience with Ottawa, I mean, I got to wonder what, who writes his paychecks. But the win here for me, Mark, is that this was a respectful conversation between two people that held different positions. I understand that they maintained that decorum and respect throughout the conversation. It was before a sold out audience. And so, to me, these are the kind of conversations that we need to have in this country. We're not going to agree on everything, but we should be able to talk about it out loud, respectfully, and we can agree to disagree. And I think this is an example of what was missing during COVID, where we weren't allowed to have conversations like this. We all had to fall in line. So I just want to acknowledge the Aristotle Foundation and the fact that Albertans showed up to educate themselves and deepen their understanding of the issues and the possibilities for Alberta.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing. It's interesting too, I'm surprised that Jason Kenney would, what is it, lead, not leave. And yet, if we go back, because you and I did interviews for WCH Canada with Dr. Gary Davidson about the
Right.
Alberta report, and one of the things that became very obvious in that is how, at the federal level, through, as I call her, the double agent of the WHO and the Canadian Liberals, Dr. Tam, how there was really a control of the science. And so I'm surprised being aware of that, his thought wouldn't have been run like hell and get out. But anyways,
Well, I think he thinks that there's still lots of people, and maybe there are, that have bought the narrative or are still buying the narrative, and I suspect, well, we know what side he's on, and they pulled out, the third line from the bench and got Jason Kennedy out there to try to convince us that staying in an abusive relationship is a good idea. So,
yeah. Well, you got to give it to him for having the courage to come out. And like you said, that's what we need. Like this is how a real, participatory democracy began in the beginning,
yeah,
was people talk, people hear other people talk, listen to experts, debate. Healthy debate is so important. So it's a good step for Calgary. I
yeah,
kind of know where my thoughts are on that, but I think there's nuances to it that should be considered.
yeah. I mean, my message has been Alberta isn't separating; they're saving Canada. I hope they succeed.
Yeah, it's kind of like a lifeboat rowing away from the Titanic. It's not really separating. Well, it is separating, but for a good reason.
You got it.
Oh, we got more coming out of Calgary. What else is going
Yeah,
on?
this is pretty interesting. So Calgary City Council voted 10 to 5 to officially rescind Alberta's climate emergency declaration that they adopted back in 2021. So this makes Calgary the first city in Canada and only one of a handful of cities around the world to formally undo this climate emergency declaration. But the motion went even further than simply rescinding the declaration. It also directed that all references to a climate emergency be removed from official city documents, strategies, plans, reports, and website materials, and that no future reports or policies may cite the rescinded declaration as justification. So they're removing this fraudulent lie that's been going on since 2021, and I hope others take heed.
Ted, this is interesting, isn't it?
Well, I'm always skeptical, Mark, and
Yeah.
I'm always asking the question, so is there another agenda at play here? And my understanding is that there's a huge data center that's being proposed for Alberta. And so is this a way of taming the criticism that's going to say, well, geez, that's going to suck up a lot of our water. It's going to require a lot of energy. Geez, isn't that going to cause carbon? So I guess maybe they had to get out ahead of the parade and say, well, we no longer have a climate emergency. We can now build a data center. But maybe I'm just a little too skeptical, Mark.
Well, it's a good point. I mean, and this is the Calgary City Council. So I think, Kevin O'Leary proposed biggest in the world data center mall. I don't know. I don't think it's within the Calgary city limits, but I do find it very, very interesting that, suddenly climate change is being set aside, Ebola is being ramped up, and there's, these data centers, as we revealed in a good
Yeah.
interview with Hakeem Anwar a few weeks ago, their environmental impact is massive, and not just carbon dioxide like cows. We're talking massive pollution of, in some cases, millions of gallons of water a day. So we'll keep an eye on that one, eh, Ted?
We shall.
Yeah. Well, here's one from south of 49th. Iowa's governor's election this week sent a powerful message, and voters elected health freedom champion Zach Lan in the Republican primary. So Zach Lan, health freedom champion, will be the Republican candidate for Iowa governor. The best part about Zach's win was his boldness to stand firm on his principles, doubling down on health freedom rather than shying away from it. Conventional political strategy says candidates should avoid controversial topics, soften their message, and water down their priorities to appeal to a broader audience. And I think we've had enough of that.
Yep.
And Zach did the opposite. He championed health freedom, and Iowa voters both rewarded Zach's honesty and proved that Americans are hungry for leaders who will tell them the truth and tackle difficult topics head on. He proved what a winning strategy it is to trust Americans to make informed decisions for their families. And they're noting that this is this comes from StandForHealthFreedom.com. They're noting that this is an important lesson for other candidates. Americans don't want timid leaders. And I'd like to hope this is also an important lesson. And actually, we've got some reporting today to show that this is happening in Canada as well. So that's good news. And last comment on that from Stand for Health Freedom is we want leaders who have the courage to speak plainly about the challenges we face and the conviction to stand by their principles when the pressure mounts. And his victory confirms what we've been saying all along. Health freedom is not fringe. Makes me think of Chris Leck and Jody Ledgerwood and the fringe majority as opposed to the fringe minority. Ted, this is the big deal. I mean, there's not many health freedom champions, and the real government should be chock full of these people. And here's Zach Land stepping in. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm encouraged by his success and his boldness, and people rewarded that. And I think we have an example of this here in Canada with the leadership convention that was held for the BC Conservative Party, and Carrie Lynn Finley won that leadership contest. And I think it was exactly for the same reasons as Zach won his, is that Carrie Lynn Finley stood up. She was very clear. She was bold. She was strong. She was principle based, and she didn't back down and soften her message. And we'll talk about that's one of the wins that we'll talk about later. But I think that's what's been missing, is that we've had too many people that soften the message so that they try to appeal to more people. And what they end up doing is actually lying to the people who know better. And maybe we're starting to see some courage along with integrity and honesty and accountability being resurrected.
Yeah. And Ted, it's the old paradigm that a politician doesn't lead anything they find a parade that they can run at the front of and look like they're leading it. And there's some truth to that for sure. And I think when we see this happening, we've got to think about all those nurses, scientists, activists, doctors who did the hard work of getting this parade going.
Yeah.
And now the parade is big enough. Out in BC, the parade is big enough thanks to Dr. Maltos, Dr. Hoff, Dr. Nagacy, Dr. Boucher, and many others, that a politician get in front of it and actually walk in a sane direction with people. So glad to see this happening. And I know there's some extremely excellent examples. When we were at the conference, Ted, Vic Meller was there, and
Right.
he's a
Right.
freedom leader, the founder of We the People Clinic in Venice, Florida. Previously, 10 years chief of staff for General Flynn, and he is now running for governor in the primaries for Rhode Island. And so we're seeing more and more of these beautiful little countries unto themselves, these little states taking back freedom and truth and making something meaningful. So it's good to see that.
Yeah, it's encouraging.
Well, we got a message from Drea Humphrey. I love Drea Humphrey.
Yeah, I do too. I think Dre does a fabulous job. She's reported with Rebel News out in BC, so I get to see Dre a fair bit. So she was acknowledging that this is the 5-year anniversary of the so-called, 215 children found in unmarked graves in Kamloops, which never happened. She reports that she headed off to Victoria, British Columbia, because there was an event that was being held at the BC legislature, hosted by Dr. Francis Widdowson, and it was around speaking to this lie that we've lived with for the last 5 years. And, she explained that, the Kamloops band took $12.1 million of taxpayer money for excavations, yet they still haven't broken ground. Anyways, there was a gathering in Victoria, and that fraud is being exposed. And we're actually going to have a win of the week that really talks about that, but it doesn't come from a Canadian source. It comes from a US source, which I think this debacle is finally getting some international attention. And I'll just close with one of her comments, Mark. She said, if children are truly buried at that site, they deserve to be found. They deserve to be named, and their deaths should be investigated. So let's get on with the excavations or stop the lie.
Yeah, that's quite a tale. I mean, to receive $12.1 million for excavation. How much does a shovel cost in BC, Ted? Like, I don't know, if you gave me 120,000, I'm sure I could dig up pretty much a schoolyard if I had a couple teenagers to help me. And we have to think too, going back to when this false rumor, when this lie was created, not only was a lot of money shuffled around from taxpayers that just seems to have gone, well, didn't go into excavating and didn't just disappear. Somebody's got a lot of money. But the backlash to that lie was churches were burned to the ground as
Yeah.
Christians were
Yeah.
scapegoated for this thing. So God bless Dre Humphrey and Dr. Francis Widdowson and, one BC MLA Dallas Brody. I got to admit, even with this new good leader of the Conservative Party, Dallas Brody is my favorite BC member of provincial legislature for sure. Well, here's something. This is going to shock you. This shocked me. Something sane happened at the Senate of Canada.
Oh my
Ted, I
God.
repeat that. Something sane happened at the Senate of Canada. And I don't mean they all resigned. It's not that good. But the Senate of Canada announced on Wednesday that the Senate had voted down the committee's third report, which attempted to criminalize, check this one out, attempted to criminalize residential school denialism. I guess because then they wouldn't be able to move another $12 million out. But it's hard to believe that somebody put this forward. And by the way, can we pull up a picture of Senator Karatek Lindell? As I understand it, this is the senator who supported and put forward that we should criminalize residential school denialism, while Professor Francis Widdowson gets beat up on a regular basis for saying, well, if there's unmarked graves, we should dig them up and they should
Yeah.
be there. But anyway, so congratulations, Senator Karatek Lindell, for, I don't know, I guess I would say winning the Weenie of the Week award. But anyways, the good news is This bill, according to Lisa Billey, the executive director of Free Speech Union of Canada, the offense would still require a prosecutor to prove that the accused had willful intent to promote hate. So it is a high bar that few cases will meet. However, the real harm would come from chilling the speech of Canadians seeking to have reasoned and nuanced discussions. Most people won't understand the intricacies of the law and will simply refrain from discussing these issues at all out of fear of criminal proceedings, thereby locking in a protective narrative. Got to admit, this was a lose for the parasite class not getting this one through.
Yeah.
So Bildley said, if residential school denial, that's in quote, residential school denialism were ever criminalized, it would only engender more ill will and damage meaningful efforts at reconciliation. Hard to
Absolutely.
believe we have to have this discussion, Ted. But Ted, are you relieved you are not going to be going to prison for residential school denialism?
Yeah, and you know what? I appreciate what Lisa Bildy had to say. You know, she's got more confidence, I guess, in our justice system than I do, even though it's a high bar to prove willful intent. You know, I believe that Crown prosecutors over the last 5 years violated the fundamentals of the rule of law and punished Canadians with lawfare as opposed to actually upholding the law. So I do believe that if this amendment to Bill C9 had gone through, it would have had an incredibly chilling effect and it would have emboldened, you know, this residential school fraudulent claims even more. So, you know, this is a bit of a stick in the spokes of the wheel of this anti-hate speech legislation, but we're not done with that. The Senate is still examining Bill C9, and I mean, I hope and pray it doesn't go through, but we know that the Senate is loaded with liberal appointees, and I think it is a stretch to think that they wouldn't pass Bill C9, which I think is the most significant attack on free speech probably in the history of Canada.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's God versus authoritarianism there. Well, we got some more good news coming from Conservative MP Dean Allison. What's going on there, Ted?
Well, this is the conference that was held this week where they announced that come September that there's going to be an inquiry into Canadians who may have been injured by the COVID-19 vaccine. And so they're calling this the Allison Inquiry, where it's an opportunity for Canadians that have been injured to tell their story. It will be broadcast live from Parliament Hill. The announcement states that the inquiry represents the first time that Canadian lawmakers will be listening to Canadians about their experience with COVID-19 vaccines. I have to take exception to that. I would suggest the NCI is the first time that Canadian lawmakers had an opportunity to hear from Canadians about the harms of COVID-19. But this is, you know, this is another opportunity for important stories to be told. You know, they're structuring this as a nonpartisan inquiry. Members of Parliament and senators from all parties are eligible to sit as panel members. It's another opportunity to have stories be told. What I'm told is that this panel is prohibited from making any declarations of fact or reaching any conclusion. So it really is a handcuffed exercise. You know, my criticism of it, Mark, is that it's one of the reasons why we began the National Citizens Inquiries. We believe government can't investigate themselves. And while this is purporting to be nonpartisan, it is still contained within the halls of Parliament, of government. I'm hoping that it has a positive impact, but I also have my doubts. Let me just say that.
Well, I can understand that. I mean, it's great that it's going to be broadcast live. So this is a chance. I think that, folks, I think we're going to have to get the link for this because this is a chance for people, that small group of people who still believe like CBC and the TV is telling them the truth. It's going to be first chance to go, oh, it looks official, it's in the government, and maybe hear what happened to some of these people and maybe find out why they're having troubles as well. So I'm very glad to see that. And did I understand correctly that the members of parliament are not allowed to say anything?
They're not allowed to make any statements of fact or make conclusions or reach conclusions from the testimony.
So, for
It's
instance, I just want to test that just for fun. So let's say Kayla Pollock. They managed to get her there in her wheelchair with her, essentially almost complete quadriplegia since her
Yeah.
spine was wiped out by the shot, so she could visit her dying and beautiful stepfather who was so good to her. So would a politician be allowed to look at her and say, "Oh, wow, since you had the shot, you can no longer move your arms and legs," or would that be violating, it's
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, in my reading of it, this inquiry is there to listen. Well, again, I'm going to go back. I think the National Citizens Inquiry has already done this job and they've done it better. One is that the testimony was all given under oath. We have more than 350 witnesses that testified about government's response to COVID. And the motto of the NCI was listen, learn, and recommend. And so there are over 400 recommendations that were drafted by the commissioners who heard the testimony at the NCI. I would have preferred that Dean Allison had said, we've already done this work, we've already received the testimony, and we have recommendations. So let's just move ahead. Let's strike a committee and let's review those recommendations. But be it as it may, I guess we'll take this little step forward for moving in the right direction.
Ted, that is a really good point. This has been done thoroughly by yourself and all the others in the team in the NCI. So now there's going to be like kind of a doing it with tape on the politician's mouth, essentially. Well, good enough. We'll let it roll and see what happens, huh? Well, we got some wins in medicine and health. And folks, I know there's some other issues, but this is wins of the week. So we're going to take a little time to look at the high end of the spectrum. President Donald Trump signed an executive order last week directing public health agencies to align the childhood vaccine schedule that reflects the quote scientific evidence and best practices from peer developed countries while preserving access to vaccines currently available to Americans. So he's saying they're going to dial it back a bit, the number, the amount of mercury and aluminum and genetic modification put in, because we're going to dial it back a little bit more in line with other countries that do a lot of it, but not this much. So I think it's a step in the right direction. And the order states, the scientific assessment found that the United States currently recommends more childhood vaccines than any peer nation, including more than twice as many vaccine doses as some European nations, and identified a set of consensus vaccines that are consistently recommended in all peer countries. The executive order also suggests guidance on how the federal government makes such vaccine recommendations and signals support for parental choice and the right to religious exemptions to vaccinations. This executive order is about far more than vaccines, said Daniel O'Connor, who's the founder and CEO of Trial Site News. It's about who gets to decide acceptable medical risks for America's children. Now, Sergi says the order represents a historic admission that the U.S. childhood vaccine schedule is an outlier among peer nations. And he said the order is the fruit of decades of work by grassroots health freedom advocates. And, Ted, that's true. When you think of the work that's been done and by people like yourself, like Mary Holland, like Dr. Paul Thomas, that I'm sure one would have thought 30 years ago, hey, look at the evidence, let's stop all this. But it's actually been way harder than that. So this is a big step forward. Ted, how do you feel about this? I mean, you're one of the leaders in this movement.
Well, Mark, this is an important step. And for most of our audience, this is probably a bit of deja vu because this is actually an action that was taken a number of months ago. And then if people remember, there was a judge that ruled that the ACIP couldn't make this decision and put a hold on it. So this action actually has been on hold for the last number of months. And Donald Trump, by signing an executive order, is able to reactivate it and give it the authority that it needs to move forward. And what it does is it is a step in the right direction to reduce the amount of vaccines that are routinely recommended for American children. And what they say here is accurate, is that Canada and the United States actually give more vaccines to our children than any other developed nation in the world. And in some cases, they give twice as many vaccines as some of the European nations. And so from a global perspective, both Canada and the United States are the outliers. They are extreme in the number of vaccines that they give to our infants and children. This is an effort to dial that back. From my perspective, Mark, and I've been pretty vocal about this, I don't think any vaccine is safe or effective. There's no scientific evidence to support their claims. This is fraudulent from my perspective, but if we can cut the number of poisons given to our kids in half, we're moving in the right direction because, we're turning around a big ship here, Mark, and at least this is turning in the right direction.
Yeah, this is very good. And I don't imagine President Trump's watching the show this week. I wish he was.
What? What makes you
I don't
think
know.
that? I'm sure
Well,
he
maybe he
is.
is. Well, if I was going to send a message to President Trump, would be thank you very much. Congratulations on making such a great move. And we're hoping that the State Department moving on the issue of vaccines and superseding, I think, the authority of the HHS regarding this Ebola program. We're really hoping this is one of your fifth dimensional chess moves, President Trump, because that would make this a double win. So
Yeah, that announcement that happened this week doesn't sound good, and I hope that this is a fifth level chess move because it doesn't. Anybody's gonna develop mRNA vaccines for Ebola to me is they're not on the right page.
kind of missed the show, didn't they, when it comes to science
Yeah.
and logical thinking? Oh my goodness, Ted, you've included something from our little team at Dr. Trozy News. What did we do right this week?
Well, you always put out good stuff, but I thought this was a really good news item that we needed to include in our wins of the week. So a German COVID inquiry was established in 2025 to examine Germany's COVID-19 response and extract lessons for future pandemics. Sounds a little bit like the NCI. And among the expert testimonies, there was one from Dr. Helmut Sturz, who's the former Pfizer chief toxicologist. He presented a pretty important critique of the development and approval of the mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccines, with particular attention to the Pfizer's biotech Comirnaty. How do you say that?
I think
Any,
Comirnaty.
all right,
Comirnaty.
we'll go with that.
They like to make fancy words so you can't pronounce it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Sturz argued that these products failed to meet established international safety standards, citing major gaps in preclinical testing, deviations from regulatory guidelines, and a reliance on post-marketing data collection, resulting in a mass rollout without sufficient understanding of the toxicological risk. That's a mouthful, but he's really calling out the process by which they allowed this product to move forward. He also talks about how cancer risk assessment was not completed prior to authorization. Key reproductive and developmental studies were inadequate. The approval process bypassed standard toxicological requirements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The bottom line, as he says, is the benefit risk profile challenged the available evidence. How's that for a soft way of saying this product was not proven to be safe or effective or necessary? Anyways, I thought that was some pretty truth telling by somebody who ought to know, Pfizer's chief toxicologist. And you obviously thought it was good news, Mark. You included in your Dr. Trozy news.
Yeah, I think it was great news, and I hope it echoes down into the prison cells where some of the best doctors in Germany are locked up. And on
Yeah.
that subject, folks, I just helped to review the English edition of a book called Criminalized Medical Care. And it's the first time these stories are going to be available in English. And I've written a foreword for the book, and it'll be out by the time we meet next week, Ted. We'll be able to share a link for that book from Dr. Gregor
Wow.
Weiser. Yeah.
Great.
And yeah, so I hope that, some of those held in prison right now. And I wonder, I'd like to reach out to some of our special listeners today. I think we have at least one or two special listeners who get paid by the medical college to watch our show. And, are you guys getting it yet? Are you starting to realize that we weren't joking when 1,000 or 10,000 doctors around the world all said the same thing, and you did your little part to, whip Patrick Phillips and Roisin Killian and Chris Shoemaker? It's coming around. I think you guys would be wise to recommend to Dr. Whitmore and everybody that the house cards is falling down. And like my mom and dad taught me as a kid, Mark, your punishment's going to be a lot less if you correct yourself. So it's time to join the show, join reality. And by the way, would you guys choose a paid subscription, at least contribute something to the truth and freedom movement? Can you imagine these buggers? They're making probably 200 grand investigating Chris Shoemaker and everybody. And they probably don't even take a paid subscription when they get on the show to try to find ways they can advance the Goblin clan. Anyways, a little fun and humor, right?
Right.
Well, that takes us to our legal win department. And here we go. Are you guys ready for the first legal win? A conservative MP who is taking the federal government to court to prevent being forced to take an automatic pay raise for MPs is getting backing from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Ted, this one is phenomenal. Okay, MP Dawson filed an application in federal court to strike down the government's requirement for him to take the annual MP pay raise, earning praise from the taxpayers' advocates. Okay, so Dawson is fighting for taxpayers in Parliament, and he's right to continue that fight in court, according to Franco Terrazzano, who's the CTF federal director. Instead of wasting more tax dollars fighting Dawson in court, the government should do the simple thing and let MPs turn down a pay raise. God bless the MPs who recognize the country's in trouble and people are in trouble paying their heat and feeding their kids, and they're saying, no, we're not going to take a pay raise. Anyways, a backbench MP's salary is now $217,700. A minister collects $321,300. And the prime minister takes home a whopping $435,400 annual salary. And in my opinion, Carney just uses that for change. He's making a lot more money with the coconut shuffling he's doing on the planet, from a banker's perspective. Anyways, Ledger polling shows 78% of Canadians support Dawson's decision to reject the MP payers. You know what? We have got to pull up a picture of MP Dawson.
Yeah.
MP Dawson, you are honoring the words of Christ. You can't serve God and be a slave to money. And I think what you've done is hilarious. And the fact that the rest of the parliament is going, no, we got to take the money. We got to take the money. These guys will give themselves a pay raise in the midst of all the messes they make. Ted, I'm excited. This one got me excited. What do you feel about this one?
Well, I didn't realize that backbench MPs make 217,000 a year. A minister collects 321,000. I thought you went into politics to serve the public, not to get rich. And I also, I'm on the same page as you, Mark. I suspect this is just a token change that there's a whole lot of money laundering that goes on if you follow the correct narrative. But I just want to acknowledge MP Dawson. I would hope other MPs take a page out of Dawson's book and stand with him on this and as well refuse the pay increase.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Salutes to Dawson. And, I'm going to look for a link and try to have it in the related material because it may be as much as 5 or 7 years ago. I believe it was in the UK Parliament. And what they showed is how few MPs were showing up to vote on important issues. Like you go there and it's like the place is empty. You can hear the crickets. And these are votes about important issues that impact, the people that they're meant to serve. But then when they had a vote about increasing their own pay, the place was packed. Everybody showed up to make sure that there was more money in the trough of the taxpayers for, as John Lennon called them in the song Little Piggies in their starch white shirts to nibble away at. So I'm excited. I really, hats off to MP Dawson. Know this face, know this name. This guy's got us happy, impressed here. Well, we got someone from one of the usual big delivers in legal wins, ICANN. What's happening with ICANN
This
this
is Del Bigtree's group, Informed Consent Action Network. We actually got to spend some time with Del this weekend. It was nice to see him in person. He's always passionate and on fire. Anyways, his legal team has sent a letter to the FDA in the States urging it to amend its rules in order to force drug manufacturers to fully disclose risks of their products in television and online advertisements. And so America is one of only a few countries in the world that allow direct-to-consumer marketing for pharma products. I didn't realize this, but prior to 1999, direct-to-consumer radio and television ads for drugs were rare because it took so much time to disclose the risks of taking a particular drug that it made the ad too long and therefore too expensive. But in 1999, the FDA gave Big Pharma a little gift, and they allowed the manufacturers to shift the risk disclosure from, instead of listing it in the ad, they could simply provide a telephone number or a website where people could go to get more information. So, when it used to be, Mark, and I remember those, is that they would have a voice talk in a speedy language, listing all the seizures and heart attacks and risks and cancer that you might get if you take this drug. Now they just get to say, for more information, go to our website. Anyways, the ICANN team is urging the FDA to stop that practice and to force drug manufacturers to list the adverse effects of their medications and their drugs and their vaccines again. And I think that would be a big step. I'm sure that that would put a big dent into the income of our mainstream media, but maybe they would get back to real journalism then when they're no longer bought off by big pharma.
Well, this really brings to mind, I think Deanna McLeod was the one that first used the term for me, obfuscation of harm. And talk about an incredible way to obfuscation of harm. Show people, elderly people dancing, feeling excellent, is such and such poison for you, and it could make you feel this great. And oh, here's a phone number just to maybe think about calling it. How many people make that phone call?
Right.
So that's great. We're glad to see ICANN doing that. Speaking of Del Bigtree and ICANN, like you said, last weekend he was the MC for the first day of the event. We got some quality time with him. He's a great guy. He's a real solid, salt of the earth human being. I was just in touch with members of his team today. I believe he's in Poland as we record this, having a film showing there, then off to Italy, like, inconvenient study. He has taken the message to the world, and such a champion for, he's an endurance athlete like you, Ted.
Well, and Dr. Colin Carey mentioned that he was talking to Dell's staff there, and they're interested in coming to Canada with his Highwire show. And so we'll need to follow up on that, Mark. I'd love for Dell to promote the Silencing Detective Grew's documentary that's now available, and exposing, actually that's the next win that we're going to talk about, or the next truth bomb, how policing in Canada has been changed because of that ruling against Detective Helen Grew. So it would be great to get Dell to help us bring some awareness to that in Canada.
I'm sure we can reach out to him and talk with him about that. He's very open to things. So yeah, let's do that. Helen Grews meets Del Bigtree. That's kind of like Superman and Wonder Woman at the same time, eh? Well, speaking of which, that brings us to the truth bombs. And as you were speaking about, Ottawa Police Service officers are effectively being warned against exercising their discretion to inquire about potential criminality related to controversial and political matters. You wouldn't make that up. Our American friends are going, no way, you didn't just say that. Yes, I did just say that. And this is according to Bathsheba Vandenberg, who is the lawyer respecting one of the few truly great and courageous police officers who's still standing, Constable Helen Grews. She's receiving a similar treatment that Jesus received for his good work. And she's a detective with the Ottawa Police Service, and she was found guilty, as folks know, for those that don't, of discreditable conduct. Who else has been accused of discreditable conduct for doing their job? Well, a bunch of doctors, a bunch of nurses. Oh yeah, police officers too. In March of 2025, following an internal professional disciplinary tribunal, it's hard to even take these people serious with their big words. Vandenberg said that the Ottawa Police Service's persecution of her client would undermine police officers' willingness to take initiative with inquiries involving informal orthodoxies of political nature, including those revolving around, COVID-19, so-called vaccines marketed as safe and effective by all levels of Canadian government and ancillary institutions. So Vandenberg continued, this decision tells us that we don't know what good policing looks like anymore, but we sure know that police officers are not allowed to use their discretion to protect us, the public, and to preserve life. They have to be aligned with political objectives, and that fundamentally means that our policing is no longer independent. Well, Mussolini would be very impressed with what's happening in the Ottawa Police Services. What do you think, Ted?
Well, this was an article in Western Standard, so I was delighted to see that they reported on this. This is a critical issue. It actually changes policing in Canada. And if this decision against Detective Helen Grews is allowed to stand, it means that we don't have a rule of law in Canada. We don't have independent policing. We have two levels. We have one for the political class and one for the rest of us. What I appreciate is about Bathsheba Vandenberg is really clear in calling this out, and so I want to applaud her as well for standing up and speaking out the way she is.
Yeah. And Ted, this operation by the globalists, I mean, this is in multiple spheres. And what we're seeing is, and I think this is important for us to realize, we have some history and some nobility in this society. And we have things called oaths, right? And so when you go to see, it used to be until COVID woke a lot of people up. It used to be if you went to see a licensed doctor, licensed, so you got that check, that they were following the Hippocratic Oath, and that meant it meant they were going to never coerce you, never deceive you. They were going to tell you the truth and the whole truth. They were going to make sure you made the decision. And suddenly, the organizations that are supposed to make sure those oaths are maintained are saying the inverse of that. You will not follow those oaths anymore. And so this is like when a brand starts making a cheap product and people still buy it because it still carries the brand name. And it takes them a while to figure out, hey, these guys used to make great guitars, but now these things are being cranked out of a sweatshop in China and they're garbage guitars or motorcycles or whatever it may be. And that's what's happening now. People are starting to realize that what's being cranked out of the organizations that are supposed to maintain the oaths of police, the oaths of politicians, the oaths of doctors, the oaths of nurses, have been flipped on their head.
Yeah.
But we should have saw this coming, Ted, because what did it used to say in police cars in Ontario? You grew up partly in Ontario too.
To serve and protect.
Every police car said to serve and to protect. That was a long-standing thing. Seemed like that's part of the oath. Why am I a police officer? Well, I serve people and I protect them. Boy, I'm sure glad there's a policeman around. And they took it off the cars, I don't know, 10 years ago. And now they're trying to erase it absolutely. So I think, it's just another area where we have to think we do need security. We do need truth. We do need to be protected. But unfortunately, for the time being, you can't count on that from the Ottawa Police Services. So you're going to have to figure out how to do it yourself. And if you're in the process of figuring it out, Constable Helen Grews is an excellent expert in that field and well worth putting in charge of whatever we're making next as we build a better way. Well, here's something. Several civil liberties and constitutional litigation groups warn that recently passed amendments to the Liberals' Bill C9, you were speaking about this, Ted, the Combating Hate Act, which would criminalize residential school denialism, to the already controversial bill, will chill genuine historical inquiry and amount to legislated bias. That's saying it lightly. Not only is the proposed criminalization of residential school denialism likely unconstitutional, but is also bad policy, said Van Gay. You don't protect the truth by making it illegal to question it. Criminal law should be reserved for conduct that harms others, not for policing historical debate. Well, to say the least. Van Gay said the answer to bad speech is better evidence, not censorship. In a free society, the state does not get to decide which historical claims may be debated and which may result in persecution. She added that the pursuit of truth requires evidence, investigation, and open discussion, not criminal sanctions for dissenting views. Ted, we wouldn't have believed we'd been here 10 years ago, but here we are.
Here we are. Now, again, the good news is we reported a little bit earlier here is that the Senate turned down that amendment to Bill C9, but this is a truth bomb. If that had gone through, boy, we'd be now criminalizing thought. We'll see what the Senate does with the rest of Bill C9, but as we celebrated a few minutes ago, at least they shut this one down.
Yeah. And it brings to mind one of the other great Canadians who made the journey with us down to Rhode Island Better Way Conference, World Council for Health, which is Nico Logan.
Right.
Who I was my first chance to meet him. Man, he's a big, strong guy, eh?
He's a big boy.
I want him as my bodyguard. But a really nice, very intelligent man, very down to earth. And this is one of the things he was talking about. And I'm going to grab some links because he's been really covering this issue. Is this Bill C9? And when you look at a collection of bills that they've been putting forward, I mean, this is the sort of stuff that the Soviet Union was built on, only in a technocracy where it's much more intense. So, well, we're glad to see that Residential school denialism was not added to the criminal code of Canada this week. Well, you got something interesting here. Folks, do you remember when they terrorized the public about COVID? Remember they terrorized you that somebody who looked completely fine, like your mom or your neighbor, could happen to breathe in your direction if they were closer than 6 feet and then you'd die? You know, a lot of us saw through it, but that kind of mental abuse really sticks with some people.
Yeah.
And so, Ted, can you share with us this story, in my opinion, of a couple of people who got really terrorized by the COVID
Mm.
operation and ended up with their own children suffering in their attempts to protect them? That's my take. But what happened?
Well, yeah, this is a pretty tragic story. So it's a German-American couple. Their name is Christian and Melissa Steffen. They kept their three young children, a 10-year-old and 8-year-old twins, locked inside their villa in Spain for nearly 4 years due to their extreme fear of COVID. The children apparently never left the house. They had no outside contact and received no medical care, which resulted in some severe physical and developmental issues. The parents were convicted of habitual psychological violence and family abandonment, and they've received a 28-month prison sentence and lost custody of their children. The win for me is the comments to this article, and it had a different take on this whole issue. And here's one of them. They said, so the parents acted in a freaked out psychological manner after being attacked psychologically and terrorized by nonstop scare tactics issued by the government and weaponized media. When are the state actors going to go to jail? When are the media lying puppets going to be incarcerated? These parents did exactly what they were fear-mongered into doing by the very government that now seeks to punish them. And then another one said, I think the news channel should be charged as well, since they instilled the fear through propaganda. I 100% blame the news for the mental state of that entire family. Tragic story, but there's a truth bomb there. I think the government and the media, if you're going to charge this family for buying the propaganda and being captured by the fear of COVID, I think you should also charge the government and the media who impose that kind of psychological warfare.
Yeah, you know, what is it called? Habeas corpus, like confinement of the body. So if people are, what's the term for it, Ted, when you take somebody and lock them up? Like not in a prison, just do it as a crime. It's sort of like kidnapping.
Yeah, kidnapping.
But but how long are you allowed to kidnap somebody for before it's a crime? Is 2 weeks okay? Remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve, or 2 months, or 6 months, or whatever it was?
2 years, yeah.
So if this couple is guilty, which I think this couple needs psychological help for sure, as do their children, as does the whole world. But if this couple is guilty for keeping their own kids locked up over COVID for some period of time, wouldn't it follow that the people that lied to us and locked everybody up are way more guilty? I don't think there should be enough room for this couple in the prison cell. I think they should be too full of politicians.
Agreed. Agreed.
Well, that takes us to the end of our list.
We've got one more here, Mark.
Oh, good news.
Yeah, this is actually, I think, probably the most important truth bomb of the week. It comes from an article from a US-based forum called Chronicles. And the article is titled, A Mass Graves Myth is Media Malpractice. And what they're exposing is the irresponsibility of the Canadian media in reporting on the purported 215 graves found in Kamloops. And so the article goes on to say, in 2021, the Kamloops Indian Band sent around a press release that claimed the remains of 215 children had been found with the help of an expert using ground-penetrating radar. Only it wasn't. No human remains have been found at Kamloops, as media that fanned the flames of that story now admit. Canada's biggest daily paper, the Globe and Mail, phrases its retraction in cagey terms. And this is a quote from the Globe and Mail. There has been no public confirmation of the discovery of any human remains, the paper conceded on May the 30th. The Globe and Mail, however, went on and said, the First Nations children at Canada's residential schools, that the absence of bodies does not mean that children did not die there. They're really calling out the Globe and Mail. They said that The media in Canada did not scrutinize, much less challenge the story. They ended the article saying the Globe and Mail has a long way to go before it makes amends. Anyways, Mark, the bottom line is here is that the whole mass graves myth story is being exposed in the United States, which I think is great. And they're really calling out Canada's mainstream media, the Globe and Mail, for their lies and deceptions in this case. And so I think this is great that the Globe and Mail is being exposed by media in the States.
Yeah, it's great to see that support coming from our cousins to the south. It's been a pretty rough week for, the Marxist communist movement in terms of creating politically correct speech and controlling words. I think they've really had a bad week, but for us, it's been a good one.
We're getting ground, Mark. We're taking ground bit by bit. It may not be as fast as you and I would like, but I just want people to know is that our efforts, our prayers are making a difference. And so don't be discouraged. Don't give up. The good guys will win, and we are winning.
Well, friends, thank you so much for joining us, celebrating the wins of the week. Hope you have a fabulous week ahead. Thanks for everything you're doing to make the world a better place. And we're going to go out with a song of the week that's a little more mellow than last week. And this is recommended by Joan R. in the comments section. And Joan R. wrote to us, she said, "Thank you both so much for this wonderful program. My husband and I listen every Sunday. I would like to recommend a song for an upcoming show. And this particular song was so inspiring to me, and it was released at a time when it was easy to feel alone. I listened and watched the videos numerous times, and these artists deserve to be showcased on your show." And this is a great tune by a group called JC or JC Rapper. The song is called Home. And before some of you in my age group stop, I don't want to hear no rapper. This is pretty nicely done, and it combines some nice rap, some beautiful imagery, and some sweet singing. There's these two artists involved. So have a great week, folks, and enjoy the song Home by JC Rapper.
See you next week, Mark.
See you then. And along the way, we got lots of work to do, Ted. It takes a lot of work making these things happen, doesn't it?
It does.
See you then.
Home is where the heart is, the center of our gravity. Home is not a privilege that is granted by Her Majesty. A home is our right, a place to raise our family. Home is where we go for tranquility and sanctity. Home is where we feel at peace and we can have some privacy, where I can voice my thoughts and nobody tries to silence me. Home is where commotion turns to settling dust. Home is where we raise our kids to be better than us. And home is more than just a house. Home is where there's unity. Home is where we gather. Home is our communities. Home is the connection that we share when we trust. Home is not about me. Home is about us. Home is the guiding light within that we feel drawn to. Home is the source of our creation we belong to. Let them try with their lies meant to pull us apart. We always find our way home because we know it by heart.
All these long and lonely roads, they wind and bend, they find me friends, they lead me home. And I know no matter where I roam, I'm watching love from high above, I'm not alone.
Home is our cities, our states and our countries. Home is the earth below, the sky above me. Home is the truth we instinctively know, helping us to find home everywhere that we go. But there's many false prophets trying to lead us astray, who want to tell us what to do but not hear what we say. They ignore us while they play their game of righteous pretend, like we don't notice that their rules ain't applying to them. While our children have lost their future, made to cover up their faces, forced to get injections for attendance at their favorite places. Where does it end? When we take to the streets, the government won't call a hearing, they just call the police. And to the faithless stormtroopers, where is your humanity? Just following orders is no excuse for your insanity. It's time to cut the rod out at the source like a cavity. It's time to go home and realize that we're a
All
family.
these long and lonely roads, they wind and bend, they find me friends, they lead me home. And I know no matter where I roam,
this country? Is this the way you like to live? Constantly harassed to put a mask upon your wife and kids. Cops with riot packs who like to act as if no rights exist. Alive, but we're not really living. What kind of life is this? The world is full of risks, but we don't need protection, cause all of their solutions are much worse than the infection. If we want resolution, we need unity, not politics. Why should we trust somebody who's broken so many promises? But maybe this was meant to be and had to happen all along. The cycle's always spinning and it's darkest right before the dawn. It's funny, to the point of laughing out loud, cause what they said would never happen, well it's happening now. And so many are waking up. Welcome to the front lines. The ones who know behind the clouds will always be the sunshine. You and I see through the lies, no longer alone, and let the compass in our souls guide and carry us home.
All these long and lonely roads, they wind and bend, they find me friends, they lead me home. And I know, no matter where I roam, I'm watching love from high above, I'm not alone. All these long, lonely roads lead me home. I'm watching love from high above, I'm not alone. All these long and lonely roads, they wind and bend, they find me friends, they lead me home. And I know, no matter where I roam, I'm watching love from high above, I'm not alone. Take me home.